What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series, we are going to be going over adding character entrances, so having the characters play a little animation once they start, and not being able to move until that animation is done. Additionally, we're going to go over match countdown timer, so a 3, 2, 1 countdown. Now that countdown is just to let the players know the match is beginning. It is not actually going to start the gameplay at that point as of today's episode because we don't have that sort of match flow in, but we're going to get that timer in and eventually we will link it up in the future. And since this is a relatively easy episode, we're going to have some bug fixes as well. So I'm going to come into my game here and I'm going to load up a stage. And when we get into the level, you'll see the characters are doing a little warm-up animation. There was a 3, 2, 1 fight on the screen and the timer begins. Now at this point I can do everything as usual and nothing should be different from the previous episode after that. Now you can see I have skipped ahead a little bit here and the timer is still counting down up at the top. There was a bug with this where it would continuously flick between 0.00 and 0.01. That's been solved now, so it will stay at 0, and of course you can customize it to your liking if you don't want to have the decimal places or whatever the case may be. But now it should be a lot cleaner all around. And before we get started, guys, I just want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I really appreciate you supporting me, believing in me, and enjoying these tutorials. You guys give me great ideas for what to work on next, and I'm always excited to see what I can come up with for you. If you want to get caught up in this series, and you can check out how to create your own platform fighter with all the content that we have in here currently, as well as all the future episodes, you can click this icon in the top right corner right here. Check out the entire playlist of the Platform Fighter and Super Smash Brothers tutorial series. Alternatively, if you just care about the character entrances and the match countdown, I'll link you to this episode right here, which is where we first set up the animations for our character, which we are going to be expanding upon today, so it is important that we have our character set up with a proper animation blueprint. Now with all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series, so we're going to start in the code today. I'm going to go into my Visual Studio and I'm going to go to my SSB template character.cpp. Now I'm going to make one small change in here, and that is in my constructor, so the function where I set all my default values. I want to set can move to false, not true. It's a tiny change, but up until this point can move was true when the character was spawned. So the character would spawn and we could move as them immediately. At this point I want to wait at least until the animation is finished. And so I'm going to default can move to be false, not true. And that little change will automatically get the result we want because earlier in the series we have gone over checking can move before doing relevant actions such as move right. Now we need a way to actually play our entrance animation. So let's go to the blueprints and let's specifically go to our animation blueprint for our character. Here we go, my default anim BP. And once this comes up now, all we need to do is go into our state machine where all of our anim BP states are and add one more state, one for our entrance animation. Now entry, the initial state that leads to your first state in your AnimBP, was previously set up to the idle animation. So once the character was spawned, they would immediately go into their idle. Instead, what we want to do is add an entrance animation and have the entry state go directly into the entrance animation. Once the entrance animation is complete, we can then go to our idle animation. So I've made a new state by right-clicking the graph and pressing Add State, and I've just called this Entrance. Now once you've created your entrance state, make sure the entry goes into entrance. Of course, there is no transition rule, it just automatically goes here. So entry into entrance. The entrance state itself doesn't have any sort of events tied to it. And then in my entrance state, I have my entrance animation. And it looks like this. It is just him kind of warming up, getting ready to fight. Nothing special on this animation. I made sure that it is not set to loop because we don't want to keep playing that entrance once it finishes. So if you click on your animation and scroll down in your details, you can see the loop animation and just toggle that off. Now, once you do this, we want to make sure that our entrance animation can go into our idle state. So we're going to need another transition rule. So drag from entrance to idle. And you'll get this little node here. This is your transition rule. And I'm going to make it automatic. So whether you're in Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 5, it's going to be the same process. You're going to check a box that says automatic rule based on sequence player in state. It's a long one. And basically what it means is that it will automatically take this transition if there are no other suitable transitions once this animation has finished. Entrance can only go to idle, and so once the entrance animation finishes, it's automatically going to go to the idle animation. And then from there, we don't have a way to go back to entrance, so every other state in here will work exactly the same as it always has. Now, when we do exit the entrance animation, we want to know that we should toggle the can move boolean to be true. The player can move at that point. And so on my transition rule, if you scroll down to the bottom, you have events here that you can add. And once we start transitioning to idle, I've added a custom event in here that I've called exit entrance. But you can call it whatever you want. Just know that this is when you are entering idle for the first time. Once you put some text in that event, you can go into your event graph and you'll be able to find this event. So it doesn't matter where you're at, just as long as you're in your event graph, you can search for the name of the event and you want the event anim notify exit entrance. And you'll get this node right here. If you pick the other one, you will get a blue node. This is the call to this node if you want to execute this node in the graph, but we don't need that. We just want to fill out the logic for it. So once we get our node here, all I'm doing is setting our can move boolean to be true. Earlier in the series, we set up a character reference, which is just the owner of this animation blueprint. That character reference has the can move boolean on it, and that character reference is the class that you just saw in the code where we were setting the can move in the constructor. So we just drag off, set can move, and check the box. And there you go. At that point, entrances are actually done. All your characters will play the entrances at the same time, but this is actually pretty typical. If you look at Super Smash Brothers games, they have the characters play their entrances slightly delayed because they actually spawn the characters one after the other in the order. So P1 is the first one to spawn, then P2 spawns slightly after that, P2 slightly after that. And usually the camera will pan around and look at them all, but you'll notice they don't play when the camera gets to them. They were already playing from before. So with our current system, this is a perfect match for how we want our entrances to behave. With the animation blueprint done, we can get into some of the match countdown stuff. And that is going to be handled in our game mode. So let's go to our code again, and let's go to our SSB template game mode.h. There are two timers that I want to keep track of. So there's the regular timer, right? The remaining time of the match that we have. That is already working, but we're going to fix a bug with it today, so we have to make that distinction. We have the match timer or the round timer, whatever we're calling that. And then we also have the match countdown, which is that 3, 2, 1 fight at the start of the match. If I scroll down on my game mode, I have made two functions. I'm going to have a start match countdown and a start match timer. And this is because I want to know when to start the match countdown, when to do the 3, 2, 1 fight. But then I also want to know when we should start decrementing from the timer itself. The match time of 99 seconds should not be counting down the whole time, because now that we have that match countdown, it kind of seems silly if the match time is decreasing while the characters can't move or do anything. And so we'll have two separate calls on when to trigger and when to take away from those timers. So we're going to make a function for the start match countdown. And this one I'm going to make blueprint callable because I'm going to call it from the HUD. Once the HUD is set up and can display countdown, we are going to actually start it. So as soon as we can see it, we're going to start it. So U function, blueprint callable, void start match countdown. But I also have another function that I have not made a U function because I don't need it to be one, called start match timer. And this is where we're going to actually decrement and decrease the overall match time. Now, once you've made those two functions, we're also going to need to make 3 more variables. So I'm going to make a variable called match countdown time. So earlier in the series, we had this remaining time, which is the remaining time left in the match. So if it starts at 99 seconds, we have 99 seconds of remaining time. The match countdown time is the time remaining on the countdown. So 3, 2, 1. And then when it goes to say 0, we're going to say fight instead. But this float variable will track how much time is remaining on that countdown. I'm using the same U property as I do for the remaining time, so you can copy it if you want, but it is edit anywhere, blueprint read write, so we can access it and change it in the blueprint if we need to. And I gave it a category of time just to organize it a little bit better. Again, that is float match countdown time. Now I've added 2 other variables, and these are both booleans. So these are booleans that we use to determine if we should actually be decrementing from these timers, or in other words, if we should be actually subtracting from the time of the countdown or the overall match time. I have one for each. So we have another variable called should countdown match. And when should countdown match is true, we're going to start taking away from our countdown timer. So you see I say, should the initial match count down? 3, 2, 1, fight. So if it's active, then we're going to actually take away from that timer. Again, this is the same U property as above, so feel free to copy it. And it is a boolean called should countdown match. Then lastly, I have another variable, this time boolean is timer active, and this is the actual match timer. One last time, it is another U property. So these all share the same U property, all the variables we're making today. And that one is called is timer active. Now, one thing I want to do, just because I typically do this in my series, is organize my variables based on their size, how much data they take up. And for some reason, I put my players array down at the bottom. But it makes sense to be at the top because I have floats, integers, then booleans. So I'm literally just going to move it up to the top. It's not important. Doesn't really make a difference if you do that, but for organizational purposes, we definitely should be doing that. That way I can stay consistent when I'm showing you or trying to find a variable. Now, at this point, our SSB template game mode.h is good. Let's go into the SSB template game mode.cpp and go into the constructor. In the constructor, we set all of our default values. So we have our remaining time as 99.0f, num_players is 3, current lane is 0. And now we want to add our other variables in there, the variables we just made. So the match countdown time, I set to be 3 seconds, 3.0f. The match countdown time is going to be the amount of time after the HUD spawns and calls that start match countdown function until the actual match starts. So if you want to have it to be 5 seconds, great. You could have it be 20 seconds. I mean, that's way too long for an enjoyable experience, but you can do whatever you want with it. I just made it 3 because that's pretty standard. Now, we also want to make sure we default our 2 booleans. So we have should countdown match, which is going to be false. We're going to set that to be true once the HUD spawns. So we want it to be false by default. And is timer active should also be false by default. We don't want to set the timer to be active until after the match is fully counted down. So no reason for it to be true in the constructor. Now let's go ahead and make our 2 functions that we added, should match countdown and start match timer. These both do very simple operations right now, but we can definitely add a lot more to them in the future if we decide to. So void a SSB template game mode : start match countdown. All I'm doing in this first function is just setting our boolean should countdown match to be true. It is literally that simple. We just want to begin counting down the match. And start match timer is no different. So void a SSB template game mode start match timer. And we are setting is timer active to be true. That's the only difference there. We're just setting a different boolean, but we're just setting them to true. This represents when the match is going to start counting down. This represents when the actual timer for the match is going to start decreasing. Now let's scroll into our tick function, which is going to be where the majority of this logic actually goes. So previously in the series, we were calling super tick, which is the parent game mode's tick function. And after that, we were making sure that we were able to get the game instance reference. And the game instance reference was important for that because we were using it to check against the match type to see if we would display the time anyway, if we wanted to actually display it, because some modes, such as the stock mode, might not have a timer at all, and so we may not want to display it. I left that in there, but I've added new logic before we check to see the match type for the game instance reference. So what I do is I check to see if we should count down the match or not. If we should, Then we're going to take our match countdown time, which remember defaults to 3.0, and we're going to subtract equals delta time. Delta time is a variable passed into tick and is how much time has passed since the last tick, or since the last frame. So assuming we don't get a lot of lag, this is going to reduce our match countdown time very fluidly. It's going to look nice because it's just going to be decreasing at the same rate over time. Now, once match countdown time becomes less than or equal to 0.0f, essentially it is no longer above 0, we can assume that the match countdown has finished. So I'm going to set the match countdown time to be 0.0f. If it went below 0.0, we don't want to show that. We want to keep it at 0. So I'm setting it equal to 0.0f. Then I'm saying we don't need to count down the match anymore. This is useful for performance just so that we don't keep running this logic when we don't need to. But also we can use it to hide data from the HUD if we decide to. Say once we set this boolean to false, we could then hide elements like the countdown timer from the HUD so that the player doesn't see it. And then I'm going to call start match timer. So as soon as the match is finished counting down, we're going to trigger the actual match timer. So that's going to start going next. Now, this next part, where we were checking to see if the match type was our standard or our timed match type, that is from previous episodes. We don't have to change anything with that. I have changed everything inside of it, essentially. So this is what we had previously. This commented out logic is what you will have in your code. So the logic that's highlighted here is what you'll have within this if statement. The logic I don't have commented out, the logic I have here highlighted, is the new logic we want to replace it with, and I'll show you why. So before we were checking to see if the remaining time minus equals the delta time was less than 0, and if we were setting the time to be 0. But I figured out that's a little bit extra work than we really need. We can do it just like we did the match countdown time. So I'm going to take out the logic that I had in there previously, and I'm going to do this instead. I am now going to check if the timer is active. We didn't have this boolean before, so the match time was always counting down when we were in the game mode. If it's not active, we don't do anything with it at all. If it is active, we go into this if statement, and I do remaining time minus equals delta time. Then I check to see if the remaining time is less than or equal to 0.00 for consistency. And if it is, we want our remaining time to be equal to 0. So we're going to cap it at 0. We don't want it to go below that and show a negative number. And then we want is timer active to be false. We no longer need to run the timer. We don't need to run any of this code. So even if we decide not to stop the game here and now, say for example you're in overtime and you don't have the timer running anymore, we still don't want to be running the timer once it's reached its minimum value. So we're going to disable the timer and we'll be finished in here. Now this logic is going to make both of our timers work. But we need to go into the editor and we need to go to our HUD widget. That way we can call the proper functions and also so we can display the countdown timer to the player. So now when I come into my character HUD, I've added a new text box here, and this is our match countdown text. So everything else is the same in this HUD except for this. So add a new piece of text to your canvas panel or wherever you want to add it, just as long as you add it to your HUD here. And I'll show you my settings for it. So I don't have it as a variable right now because we're just going to bind the visibility and the text to parameters that we have from the code in the game mode. So we don't have to change anything about it on the graph itself. I have set the anchor to be the middle option. And then I've set the position to be 0 and -80. You don't have to do the position change. This is just because I wanted it to appear in the center of the text on the screen and the player cards in the bottom. If you do the anchor with no position adjustment, it's going to be a little low on the screen because it's technically in the center of the HUD, but it's not in the center between the match timer and the player cards. So putting it at -80 just makes it look nicer for me, in my opinion, because I prefer where it's sitting now. Here are my sizes for the box itself. Again, you don't have to copy this. You can see I've made it slightly bigger than the number, just so that I can play around with it if I want to display text here. Like, I actually write fight in here. It's not always numbers. So I just want to make sure it looked good regardless of size, and I threw in some test values here. I also changed the alignment from 0.0 and 0.0 to 0.5 and 0.5 because, as usual, the widget location goes off the top left unit of the text widget. And so if you don't modify this to be 0.5 and 0.5, when you do the center anchor, it's not going to actually appear in the center. I want the center of the text to appear in the center of the screen, not the top left position. So this is what I'm doing. Now, the rest of it really is just up to you. So you have your size of your font, your outline settings. I put it in center for justification. That way, as this gets bigger, like when we write the word fight in here, it still stays in the center. And that is pretty much it for the individual settings. We have 2 bindings we need to set up in here. So if we go to our content text, you can write something in here if you'd like. For me, I wrote the number 3 because I wanted to start at 3, but it doesn't matter. This is just temporary text for you. The important part is the binding here. So if you don't have a binding currently, you'll have a drop down that says bind. You want to click that and hit create binding. Once you do that, it will automatically take you into the graph and you will get something like this. You have get match countdown text underscore 0. And I went ahead and renamed that to just get match countdown text because I thought it was cleaner. You'll notice all my other bindings have that underscore text underscore 0, but that's exactly what I'm trying to avoid here. So I just renamed it, but don't be confused. This is the same node that you have, and then you should have one return node as well. All these other nodes I've added. And so what I want to do is check the match countdown time on the game mode and then display that to the screen. Now in my HUD, I already have a game mode reference, and this is just a reference to my game mode. It's literally that simple. It's an object reference that we set to our current game mode. And I want to get that game mode reference, and I want to right click on it and hit convert to validated get. This will make it so we can check if it's valid or not before using it. And if it's not valid, we just don't want to display anything at all, so we're not going to do anything. But if it is valid, we want to display the match countdown time. So we can drag off of our game mode reference and search for match countdown time. This is the variable we made earlier in this episode. So what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if the match countdown time is less than a specific value, and if it is, we're displaying fight instead of the actual number. So if I were to leave this logic out and just return the actual number, this is what it would look like. It would go 3, 2, 1, 0, and then go away. If you want that, you don't have to include this branch or this extra return node. But if you do want what I have, then we need to drag off of our match countdown time and check if it's less than a specific value. So I'm going to say less than 1.0. Depending on your rounding, when it is less than 1.0, it may display 0 to the screen. So instead of displaying 0, I was checking, plugging this into a branch, and if it's true that it's less than 1.0, we add another return node, which you can grab by pressing add return node here. And then you can put in manual text, like fight. But you can also pass in the actual number from the match countdown time, which is what we want to do if it's not less than 1.0. Alright, so we have all this right here. Now the last return node, you can hit add a return node to add a new one, or use the one that you already had there. We want to just basically plug in match countdown time to the return node. When you do this, you will get a node called toTextFloat. You can then press this little down arrow to get what I have over here on the right. So I'm going to get rid of this new one that I just created. And here we have our toText node. It should take in the match countdown time, and it should have the return value lead into the return node. Now you can change different options about this variable, as well as what the text will display. So one thing I did is I changed the maximum fractional digits to 0, so it won't display any of the fraction. So it's not going to say 2.5, 2.4, 2.3. It's just going to say 3, 2, 1. So I would recommend putting this at 0. The other options are all okay, except the rounding mode you may want to change. The rounding mode is going to be used to determine when it should round. So if we are not using the maximum fractional digits here, like we're not, we just have 3, 2, 1. When do we want to display 3, 2, and 1? The initial option is half to even. Since we're going down, it basically means once we are below 2.5, we're going to read 2. Once we're below 1.5, we're going to read 1. Once we're below 0.5, we're going to read 0. That's what half to even is. Now, this initial rounding mode is actually fine. If you want all of your numbers to stay on the screen for the same amount of time, which you probably should, we'll actually change our 1.0 to 0.5 in this check. Because at that point, it's going to go from 3 to 2.5, in which case it will go to 2. 2.5 to 1.5, which will go to 1, and 1.5 to 0.5, which will go to 0. I do recommend that if you do that, you then change your match countdown time from 3.0 to 3.5. The players won't really notice it or care, but if you do that, then you'll get the full 3 seconds for each number, and then the fight text itself will be half a second. So play around with your rounding settings. You have a lot of different options here that you can do, but this will get you your 3, 2, 1 fight. So you can just customize the timing and all that, but this is all you need to actually get that logic working. Now there's one other thing I would like to show, and that is the visibility. So you saw that the text went away, went off the screen once the match started, and I want to show that off. I want to do that. So if we go into the design view again, and scroll down to the behavior option, there is a visibility section, and you can add a binding on here as well. So you're going to press your bind and create binding, and it's going to bring you back to the graph one more time, and it's going to bring you to this function. Again, it's going to say something like get match countdown text visibility underscore 0. I just renamed it to clean it up a little bit. And then you'll have a return node in here as well. I was automatically hiding it when we set the should countdown match variable to be false, but you don't have to do that. You could add an arbitrary amount of time and hide it after that. To use my method, what you're really going to want to do is grab your game mode reference. You're going to convert it to a validated get to check for validity again before using it. And we now want to grab our should countdown match boolean. And you could do a branch, or you could do a select here. This is a good place for a select. So you can drag off of your boolean and type select. And you want the standard select when you're passing in a simple boolean. It is useful for having one path that returns a value based on the parameter that we pass it. So it's very, very similar. It does the same thing as a branch, but it does it a little bit cleaner, so we don't have to write a branch and then cover true and false. Then we are going to automatically pass our return value into the return node. Once you do this, the select statement will automatically fill out with the possible types for that return value, so it's super useful. At this point, you can change them to be whatever values you want. So basically, to use a select, you take the parameter that you're passing in, read the value, and figure out what logic you'd want to happen if this variable was that value. So if should countdown match is false, we want it to be hidden. If should countdown match is true, we want the countdown match text to be visible. Now there's only one more thing we have to do, and this is actually start our match countdown. So in my event graph for my character HUD, I do a lot of stuff in here to grab all the information from my player cards from my characters. That's not required for today's episode. But after I had done all that, I had triggered a function that we created in the HUD called determine timer visibility, which basically just hid the timer if we were on a mode that didn't use it. After this logic, I went ahead and called my start match countdown function. And to do this, you just need your game mode reference one more time. At this point, it should be valid. You can see I've used it before without checking for validity. So if it goes invalid at this point, you have a different issue. We don't have to check for validity. And we can call our start match countdown function that we made in the code. Once you do this, your match countdown should begin as soon as you play the game. So we'll come in here, and our match countdown begins. Then once the text goes away after the fight, the actual timer begins for the match. And there we go, guys. So that's how you can get character entrances and a little bit more of match flow with your match countdown and your timer working in your game. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please subscribe or consider supporting me on Patreon or YouTube membership. It means the world to me, and it really helps me keep this series alive, so thank you. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It is completely free, and I'd be happy to assist you with any problems that you ran into. But otherwise, guys, that's all I got, so thank you again for everything and for watching this video. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll catch you next time. See you later, everyone.